Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely fascinating topic from the course Clinical Cognition from First Principles, and we're going to focus our lens specifically on Lesson 1. We're exploring a phenomenon that happens literally millions of times a day all around the globe, yet it remains almost completely hidden from view. Going back to first principles here means we aren't just skimming over surface-level medical tips. Nope, we are stripping away all the assumptions to look at the absolute foundational bedrock of medical thought. It's really about understanding the intricate step-by-step cognitive process of a clinician right from the ground up. Because, this invisible architecture dictates every single treatment plan, every prescription, and every life-saving intervention. We trust our clinicians every single day. Think about it. You walk into a clinic with a weird cough, a sudden spike in temperature, or maybe a strange localized pain, and you leave with a diagnosis and an actionable plan. But have you ever stopped to wonder how they actually move from those raw, totally disconnected symptoms to a final, concrete judgment? Think about the sheer volume of data a doctor takes in within just the first 2 minutes of seeing a patient. They're processing your vital signs, parsing your medical history, analyzing your body language, and listening to your description of the pain, all while rapidly cross-referencing this against thousands of diseases stored in their memory. So what exactly is happening in that split-second space between you saying, "It hurts right here," and them deciding, "Take these pills twice a day"? Well, the core problem this course tackles head-on is the invisible medical mind. Because usually, the reasoning behind a medical diagnosis stays completely unseen. It operates exactly like a locked black box. We can easily see the inputs going in, right? The patient's history, the lab results, the symptoms. And we clearly see the output, the final diagnosis. But the intricate machinery turning the gears in between, that critical journey remains trapped securely inside the doctor's head. And honestly, this invisibility is a massive problem. Because when that black box fails and a misdiagnosis occurs, how do you fix it? If you only see the inputs and the outputs, you have absolutely no way to trace back where the logic went off the rails. You just can't debug a system you can't see. That's where this comes in. Clinical cognition isn't just about getting the right answer at the end of the day. It is fundamentally about how clinical reasoning actually moves to get to that answer. This entire exploration is designed as a dual-track framework, which is what makes it so uniquely powerful. Yes, it's incredibly valuable for practicing clinicians who want to sharpen their own diagnostic minds and avoid cognitive traps, for sure. But it is equally built for technical readers, software engineers, and system designers who really need to understand the underlying mechanics of human medical decision-making. As we stand on the brink of integrating massive AI systems into healthcare, those engineers absolutely have to understand how a human doctor thinks in order to build AI assistants that can safely and effectively replicate, support, or double-check that logic. So there is a fundamental difference between the diagnosis, which is the final conclusion, and the reasoning trace, the cognitive journey that got us there. We're deliberately shifting our focus away from just celebrating that final destination. Instead, we're shining a really bright spotlight on the reasoning trace itself. Think of it kind of like a detective trying to understand how someone arrived at a cabin in the woods. You don't just stare at the cabin, right? You study the precise footprints left in the snow. How deep are the prints? Where did they pause? Did they take a wrong turn near the river before correcting course? That is exactly what tracking clinical cognition looks like. We are examining the cognitive footprints to understand the exact path the clinician walked to reach their conclusion. Now, to take what is usually locked away in a master practitioner's mind and lay it flat on the table, we have to move through a very deliberate process. We start with step 1, recognizing the internalized, hidden thought process. Then we move to step 2, actively forcing that reasoning trace out into the open. Which brings us to step 3, finally making the invisible visible. And why does this exact sequence matter to you, or really to anyone who will ever be a patient? Because once that thought process is visible, it becomes auditable. In medicine, an unaudited error can cost a life. By making the reasoning visible, a senior doctor can look at a junior doctor's logic and spot a fatal flaw before a treatment is ever prescribed. It literally transforms an opaque art into a transparent, fixable science. But you might logically be asking yourself, okay, how do we actually expose this hidden trace? You can't exactly just plug a USB drive into a doctor's brain to download their thoughts. We need a reliable mechanism to extract it. And this is where Socratic learning and guided discovery come into play. Broadly speaking, this isn't about rote memorization or just handing someone a textbook to memorize disease symptoms. Rote memorization teaches you what to think, but guided discovery teaches you how to think. It's a method of asking a series of disciplined, highly structured questions that guide the learner to uncover the truth on their own, exposing every single step of their logic along the very way. Socratic questioning acts as the ultimate tool for forcing that trace right into the open. Instead of just asking for a rapid-fire final diagnosis, this method uses targeted, constrained questioning. It literally forces the learner, or hey, even an AI system, to make a genuine cognitive attempt out in the open before the answer is revealed. Imagine a medical resident is looking at a patient with chest pain. Instead of just asking, "Is this a heart attack?" a constrained Socratic question would be, based on the patient's elevated heart rate and lack of radiating pain, what are the top 3 most likely causes, and which piece of evidence would rule out the most dangerous one? It demands that you show your work. And research shows that forcing this genuine attempt fundamentally changes what a learner actually retains. Now, what's really cool is that this concept of making reasoning visible is just the very first step. It acts as the absolutely necessary foundation for building what the course comprehensively calls the core cognitive engine. Think of it like a mechanic working on a high-performance sports car. The invisible mind is a car with the hood welded shut. It might drive, but you have no idea how. Exposing the reasoning trace is the equivalent of finally popping that hood open. You're now looking at the engine block. Once the hood is open, you can see the pistons moving. You can check the oil, you can listen to the timing belt. You simply can't construct, tune, or fix a cognitive engine if you can't even see the moving parts. And this cognitive engine, it consists of interconnected gears that drive clinical decision-making through a core loop. Let's walk through a patient encounter to see how these gears actually turn in practice. The loop begins with raw observation. Say, a doctor noticing a patient's extremely pale skin and rapid breathing. That observation immediately turns the next gear, building a differential diagnosis, where the doctor weighs the probability of asthma versus anemia. But before committing to a treatment, the engine forces a bias audit. The doctor has to ask themselves, wait, am I only leaning toward asthma because I just saw 3 asthma patients? They check for cognitive failure modes right at the moment of commitment. The loop continues through patient advocacy, running analytics, and performing safety checks, borrowed straight from aviation engineering. It's a constant churning cycle of observation, hypothesis, and rigorous self-correction. To put this into an even broader perspective, let's compare this whole concept to evidence-based medicine, or EBM. While evidence-based medicine asks, can I trust this evidence? Clinical cognition fundamentally asks, how did I get from my findings to a judgment in the first place? These two disciplines aren't competing. They are beautifully complementary. Think of it like constructing a massive skyscraper. Evidence-based medicine checks the quality of the materials, making sure the steel beams and bricks are perfectly sound. But clinical cognition? It checks the structural integrity and logic of the architectural blueprint itself. You can have the highest quality, most evidence-backed bricks in the entire world, but if your blueprint is flawed, that building is still going to collapse. You absolutely need both perfectly reliable evidence and a perfectly logical blueprint to save a patient. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a pretty provocative question to chew on. If we can truly map the medical mind, if we can consistently take that locked black box and make the invisible reasoning trace visible, how will it change the future of healthcare and technology? Widen your scope for a second and picture the hospital of the near future. Imagine a ward where an AI model proposes a diagnosis, but it is constrained by Socratic loops to show its exact mathematical reasoning trace to a human doctor. And in return, the human doctor's logic is continuously bias audited by the system before any medication is ever given. When we finally expose the architecture of clinical cognition, the possibilities for safer, smarter, and profoundly more collaborative medicine are truly limitless. So keep asking questions, and always look for the reasoning behind the conclusion.